He stained the bat to infect the other survivors with the zombie virus. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 11th and 12th episodes of the 8th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. As soon as this video gets 300 likes, I will release the next part. Enjoy watching it.
The patrol Save the Saviors receives a message about the disappearance of Carson and Gabriel. When they set out to search, Daryl leads the remaining Alexandrians and Dwight under the bridge and disappears from sight of the Saviors. In the forest, the group stumbles upon the finder. Tara tries to deal with him, but lets him go to Dwight, claiming that he broke out of her arms. Dwight deals with him before the group moves on. Rosita and Daryl discuss the Saviors' report and conclude that Carson and Gabriel are also heading to Hilltop. Elsewhere, Carson and Gabriel are sitting in a car, disoriented on the road and trying to determine their location on the map. Carson notices that Gabriel is shifting the map, trying to read it better, and worries that the infection may hit his optic nerves and blind him. When Carson tries to start the car again, Gabriel barely notices that a walker with an ankle chain is crawling next to them. After getting rid of the walker, Carson checks Gabriel's eyesight, whose condition is deteriorating. He condemns himself for allowing Gabriel to leave the asylum in his current state. Gabriel notices a noise coming from the forest, and the two go in search. They find an abandoned building with a metal panel swaying in the wind, but Carson is uncomfortable with this area. Alexandrians, having walked a considerable distance, rest in the forest. As Daryl and Rosita make their way back to cover their tracks, Tara, still vindictive, asks why Dwight is still alive. Daryl and Rosita agree that Dwight may still be a valuable employee, while Rosita decides to wait with him until they get to the Hilton. While Hilton is strengthening, Carol tries to relieve Morgan of his duties by offering to look after Henry and the captured rescuers. Jared tries to persuade Morgan to release them, but Henry speaks up, demanding to find his brother's killer. Carol sends Henry to Jerry while she talks to Morgan. Morgan asks why they can't just tell Henry who killed Benjamin. Carol counters that Henry, being a small child, is still vulnerable. Negan went to Eugene, disappointed that Eugene's efforts did not lead to a complete solution to the problem and that his two captives somehow escaped unnoticed, not knowing that it was Eugene's doing. Negan confirms that as soon as Carson and Gabriel are caught and taken to the shelter, he will find out about their escape. Then Negan appoints Eugene as the head of his outpost, a small team engaged in the manufacture of ammunition for the Saviors. Negan explains that bullets are a last resort if the survivors refuse to reconcile with the rescuers. Carson and Gabriel enter the log cabin. Gabriel finds a notebook and, trying to read it, comes to the conclusion that the hut was used as a radio station. While Carson is pessimistic about their chances of finding help through the station, Gabriel tries to find light in their situation. However, morale fades after Carson discovers that the radio operator, presumably committed suicide, has turned. Daryl, Rosita and Tara look at the various routes on the map that rescuers can take from the shelter to Hilltop, and come to the conclusion that most of their paths can be potentially dangerous. Dwight, however, points out that the alternative path through the swamp is forbidden by Negan because of the danger it poses to the Saviors. Silence falls on the group. When Tara realizes that they are going to walk through the swamp, she speaks out against this plan. The Alexandrians doubt Dwight's loyalty, fearing that he may turn against the militia just as he deserted from the Saviors. He claims that while he was killing his comrades, one of them managed to escape, and declares that he will not return to the Saviors, seeing that a price has now been set for his betrayal. He confirms his choice in favor of the militia, agreeing that everything that happens after the fall of Nig will happen to him. After listening to his words, Daryl agrees to go through the swamp. Maggie looks after Agressi until Diana enters the room with an inventory log. There is less and less food in the Hilltop, and Diane fears that rations will have to be cut even more in order to last the next week. The situation will worsen if we take into account the rations of the captive rescuers. Searching the room for something useful, Carson notices that Gabriel is sitting on the bed and trying to read a container of antibiotics. Carson understands that antibiotics are exactly what Gabriel needs to fight the infection. On the way to the swamp, Daryl and Dwight discuss Sherry and the possibility of finding her in the swamp. They approach the water's edge and discover that the murky depths are littered with decomposing walkers. Daryl gathers volunteers to help clear the swamp of infection. Dwight is not allowed, and Tara decides to stay to watch the group. Gregory talks to Maggie through a barbed wire fence, reasoning that he should be released for good behavior, but Maggie refuses to release him. Then Alden approaches them, who speaks on behalf of the other saviors and tries to come to an agreement, offering from time to time to give the prisoners freedom for a few minutes. Maggie again refuses and informs them that he deprives them of rations for several days, which greatly shocks the saviors and Gregory. The group continues to destroy walkers in its path, while Rosita is almost dragged under the water. Later, Daryl and Siddiq discover many gurgling corpses blocking their way forward. They move forward, quickly and carefully laying down every walker in their path. While the rest of the Alexandrians are waiting on the shore, Tara notices a small group of walkers in the trees. She asks a volunteer to help her remove them, and then throws the knife in Dwight's direction. Picking up the knife, he goes with the old one to the walkers. While giving Gabriel antibiotics, Carson performs another diagnosis and discovers that the temperature has subsided, but his vision is still weakened. He expresses concern that Gabriel doesn't seem too concerned about his situation. Instead, Gabriel remains true to his faith in God's plans for the two of them. Explaining his feelings, he accidentally knocks over the piggy bank he found earlier and discovers a bunch of car keys and a map of the area. Carson reads the map and discovers that they are actually not far from their destination. Dwight fights off the walkers with a knife, and Tara restrains them with her gun. As they walk forward, Dwight expresses remorse for the murder of Denise, agreeing that he may not be forgiven for what he did. After killing the last walker, Dwight turns around and sees that Tara is holding him at gunpoint. He tries to reason with her, explaining that his decision to switch sides was a sincere gesture. Tara, however, is fixated on the spot for Denise and makes several attempts to shoot Dwight while chasing him through the woods. They come to the clearing, but they are interrupted by a patrol of rescuers, and they are forced to hide in the bushes. Carson and Gabriel leave the cabin in search of a car. As Gabriel walks past the swaying metal sheet, he manages to make out a message written on one side. Warning about traps in the area. He does not have time to warn Carson, as he steps on a bear trap. At the sound of his screams, walkers begin to come running. Gabriel rushes to Carson while he fights off a small horde. He barely survives when Gabriel finds a revolver and hits the last walker with a lucky shot. When a patrol of saviors passes by, Tara continues to hold Dwight at gunpoint. She then turns her attention to a patrol that is approaching their position. Trying to distract their attention, Dwight makes himself felt by explaining that he survived an ambush near Alexandria. He asks about Laura, but he finds out that nothing has been heard about her. He then leads a patrol in the opposite direction from the swamp, claiming that he has not seen a single Alexandrian crossing the area. Tara turns to leave and discovers Rosita, who has followed the couple. She asks why she didn't try to stop her, to which Rosita explains that she would also pursue him to the end. Back in the swamp, Daryl gives vent to his anger, berating Tara for letting Dwight go, and risks betraying their group to the saviors. Tara is convinced that Dwight has changed for the better, seeing how Dwight is trying to distract the saviors from their whereabouts. Daryl remains unconvinced, but does not want to continue the conversation and leads the Alexandrians through now clear water. Gabriel helps Carson into the jeep. Carson thanks Gabriel for his help, but their moment is interrupted by the presence of the rescuers, who were attracted by Carson's shots, and the two are captured. Gabriel again remains faithful that God has a way for them. Carson agrees with him and grabs one of their weapons. He does not have time to shoot, as he is shot down by another savior. Disappointed that they have lost another doctor, the rescuers retreat back to the shelter, and the murdered Gabriel sobs. The Alexandrians arrive at the gates of the hilltop, bearing the news of the fall of the city and the death of Charles. The news of Carl's death brings Enid to her knees, and Maggie comforts her. Carol, Morgan and Henry discuss the circumstances of Carl's death after learning that he died helping a stranger. Morgan explains to Henry that Gavin is responsible for Benjamin's death, that Gavin's murder means that he has already avenged his brother. Siddiq approaches Maggie to personally thank her for her hospitality. He asks if there is an infirmary in Hilltop, explaining to Maggie that he has medical experience and wants to help the community. She directs him to the trailers. When he leaves, Maggie looks around the community. Eugene is working with his team to create bullets. Frankie approaches him with the intention of helping with the housework. Instead, Eugene treats her badly, in the form of her only servant. Then, Negan bursts into the room, followed by 2 rescuers bringing the captured Gabriel. Negan claims that he has Gabriel's story about the circumstances of his and Carson's escape. To Eugene's relief, Gabriel holds Carson responsible for planning their escape, not Eugene. Negan then assigns Gabriel to sort Eugene's empty shell casings. Eugene reports that although his ammunition was of excellent quality, their quantities are running out. He suggests creating a catapult-type device to launch the insides of walkers into opposing forces as a last attempt to dissuade them from fighting. Having received new ideas from this ridiculous scenario, Negan leaves, satisfied. Eugene approaches Gabriel, who is still traumatized by Carson's death. He complains that he thought he had found his destiny. Eugene waves him away and pushes a tray towards Gabriel, demanding that he start sorting the casings. Maggie returns to the isolation unit and agrees to a deal with Alden, allowing a maximum of 2 rescuers to leave the isolation unit at any time for work and, if necessary, medical care. Gregory, grateful for her decision, worries about the upcoming attack of the Saviors and asks Maggie to think about evacuation, afraid of losing the war. She remains firm, telling Gregory that with everything they have now, the probability of loss is small. Her attention is drawn to the gate when Rick's arrival is announced. Negan gathers the remaining rescuers in the shelter, including Dwight, in a courtyard with several walkers chained to fences. He talks about the transformation process when a walker is bitten and suggests using this for their own purposes, covering the weapon with the remains of walkers. He will effectively spoil it, and although the weapon may not kill the enemy, the insides will create a reliable way to infect the victim. He then covers Lucille with a thick layer of the blood and flesh of one of the walkers and shows her off to the crowd. Negan walks into Dwight's apartment and welcomes him back to the shelter. Dwight explains that he was heading to the hilltop in the hope of bumping into the Saviors. Negan orders Dwight back to work. Simon leads his team while they gut the yard walkers and collect the entrails into which they immerse the weapons for the attack on Hilltop. Negan predicts that Rick's group will give up as soon as they understand his new strategy. Dwight joins the Saviors as they mobilize. Simon instructs his team to injure several Hilltop people with their tainted weapons and give them the opportunity to convert rather than kill them. Dwight gets on the motorcycle and informs Simon that he plans to scout their route. Simon says they already have scouts and that Negan wants them to go together. They leave together with the column of Saviors. Negan dips Lucille into a bucket of Walker's guts and takes the open bucket with him to the car. Rick and Michonne stay at Hilltop and reunite with Judith. Daryl apologizes to Rick for attacking the shelter behind Rick's back. Rick forgives him and assures him that he is ready to fight with Negan, despite Carl's death. Maggie stands guard and looks through binoculars and notices a mysterious box in the distance. On the way to Hilltop, Simon asks Dwight what he thinks of Negan's plan. Dwight hesitates to answer. Simon expresses his doubts that Negan's strategy will work, given that Rick, Maggie and Ezekiel are not afraid of them. Rosita finds a box and gives Maggie a note attached to it, in which they are offered the key to your future in exchange for food and notes. The note contains the coordinates of the meeting place. Maggie worries that it's a trap, but Michonne suggests they investigate. Rick watches the road from a parked car. He spots Negan's column and reaches for the horn to warn the others, but at the last second decides to go after Negan alone. Driving through the city, Rick crashes his car into the side of Negan's car, and then chases him through the city streets. Simon orders the rest of the rescuers to stay behind and set up a perimeter while he and Dwight search for Negan. Negan wakes up in his overturned car, covered in the guts of walkers. Rick gets out of the wrecked car, approaches and shoots at Negan, who uses the car for cover. Negan escapes to a nearby abandoned building, and Rick follows in his footsteps. Inside, Rick continues to shoot at Negan, but he quickly runs out of ammo. On the stairs, He throws his axe at Nig and almost misses. Negan breaks through the banister on the landing and hangs on the edge, holding his fingers. Rick grabs his axe and cuts off Negan's hands, but Negan loosens his grip and falls into the basement. Michonne, Maggie, and Nit drive to the designated meeting place and find two women waiting by the van. A third woman in a suit comes out and introduces herself as Georgia. Her bodyguards are called Hilda and Midge. Georgia explains that she can give Maggie valuable knowledge in exchange for food. Instead, Maggie takes them prisoner. Rick is looking for Negan in the basement. He discovers a barricaded storeroom full of walkers. Negan proposes to Rick. If Alexandria, Hilltop, and the Kingdom comply, they will have to send only a quarter of their supplies to the Saviors while Rick works as a janitor at the shelter. Rick objects that Negan has lost confidence in himself after the Saviors killed all the scavengers. Negan is stunned by the news of the massacre. The Face finds Lucille on the ground. Simon and Dwight are looking for Negan. Simon puts pressure on Dwight, forcing him to confess his resentment towards Negan. Dwight sarcastically says that he never thought about killing Negan even after he took his wife and burned his face. Simon expresses a desire to leave Rick's group and find new communities. Simon and Dwight find Negan's wrecked car. They decide to give up the search and return to the Saviors. Dwight sets the car on fire. At the hilltop, Rosita and Neat guard George, Hilda and Midge. Michonne is talking to Maggie. Maggie refuses to let George go after discovering a substantial supply of food in her van. Ennett believes that taking food to feed his starving people is the right move, but Michonne objects that Carl wanted them to become better people. Maggie thinks about it. Rick tells Negan that Lucille is with him. Negan forbids Rick to touch her. Rick sets Lucille on fire and breaks the barricade in the warehouse, breaking into it. Negan attacks him. Rick swings at Negan. Meanwhile, walkers come out of the vault and attack. Negan attacks Rick, grabs his favorite bat and runs away. Rick chases him through the window. He runs outside and discovers that his car has disappeared. Maggie gives George a crate of food albums, and George in return gives a significant portion of the food to his van in the form of Hilltop's desperate situation and knowing that he needs supplies more than she does. She gives Maggie a folder full of plans for windmills, watermills and other schemes that will help create a community, the key to the future she talked about. Build this place, she urges Maggie. After Georgia and Nit leave, he talks funny, expressing his skepticism about Georgia's vision. Michonne believes that Carl told them that it is necessary to build the future not only by fighting. Simon and Dwight inform the rescuers that Negan is no more. Simon reminds them that with or without their leader, the plan continues as they are all Negan. He suggests they attack Hilltop and kill everyone. The rescuers raise their weapons in solidarity, and Dwight looks on in horror at what is happening. Negan wakes up in the car and finds Jedis at the wheel, holding him at gunpoint. He grins, and Jedis knocks him out.